The day before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man identifying himself as Dan Cooper bought a plane ticket from Portland to Seattle. He hijacked the plane, claiming he had a bomb in his briefcase, and demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes. He jumped out of the plane with the money and the bomb somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, never to be seen again. The FBI claims to have investigated over 1,000 people, including dozens of deathbed confessions. In 2016, 45 years after the hijacking, the FBI suspended its investigation of the case. While the FBI is no longer looking for D.B. Cooper, there is a community of people who are trying to solve the case on their own. Welcome to the Cooper Vortex. At CooperCon in November, I met this British dude who flew all the way to Portland just for the event. He ended up hanging out with the hard-partying Cooper crew, which included myself. Man, we had fun that weekend. Anyway, I told him I wanted to have him on the show, and we finally found the time to set up a transatlantic Zoom call. Enjoy this episode with my good friend, Robert Cox. Rob, when was the first time you heard about D.B. Cooper?
Well, I was hoping you'd ask me that question first, because I've got a slightly interesting and unusual answer to that, in that I don't actually know. Which sounds a bit odd, I know, but the reason I say that is because I've been aware of it for years. I'm talking 20 odd years, maybe something like that. I've known about it. I've been aware that it was a thing, a real situation, a historical event. But I only really got into it, as in, became really interested in and discovered the vortex and everything else. About a couple of years ago now, just as we got into the lockdown during the first COVID outbreak a couple of years ago. And that's when I came across the History Channel documentary on Sky of it on Rackstraw, which was the one by Tom Colbert and his associates, wasn't it?
Yes.
I just happened to be idly...
D.B. Cooper, case closed with a question mark.
That's the one. Couldn't remember the title. Yeah. Well, I just happened to be idly, mooching through TV channels on one evening when I had some time on my hands. I was, like many people, spending more time at home than usual, having been furloughed from my job. And I just stumbled upon it. And then I just suddenly remembered, oh, I remember that. And it sort of sprang forward from the back of my mind, because, like I say, I knew about it from years ago. I want to say I'd sort of read something about it maybe in the dim and distant past, in a newspaper article or a magazine article or something like that, and thought to myself, well, that's interesting. That's a pretty cool mystery. One day I'd like to maybe research that a bit more and find out a bit more about it. But then, as often happens with a lot of things, you just sort of never get round to doing it, and I never did. But I was always aware of it from quite a long time ago. And then, of course, as I say, this opportunity sprang up in a way to get into it a bit more. So I noticed, this documentary on the channel listings, and I thought, all right, yeah, I remember that. I always wanted to know a bit more about that and find out about it. So I put it on and watched I think it was 2 episodes, wasn't it? It was split into 2 documentaries.
Yeah, I think it was 2-hour-long parts.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah, so I watched both, and of course, I don't know what you think of it, but it's well made. Obviously, it's sort of big budget, slick, well presented, and I kind of found myself thinking, oh right, wow, that was the guy then, this Rackstraw fella, which most people would probably scoff at now. And it didn't take me long to actually start thinking about it and work out, hey, wait a minute, is it really him, or are there a lot of holes in that? And I soon moved on from the opinion that it was Rackstraw, put it that way, because I decided that he wasn't a very good candidate after all. But that's what kind of got me into it, and sort of got me hooked on Cooper. In the first place, if you like, if you disregard the article I read 20 years ago or whatever. So, and then after that, I thought, right, well, okay, I want to know a bit more about this now. So I think I obviously looked it up on Wikipedia, which is probably most people's first port of call, and then I got a few books on it. Read a couple of books.
What books did you get? I gotta know.
I'm just trying to remember. I don't. The first one I got, and I'm trying to remember the title just to warn anybody else off it because it was absolutely terrible. But it was only a small, thin book. It wasn't like one of the main ones. The sort of better known, more well established and well resourced books. I want to say it was by Francis somebody, but it was kind of just the first book I came across, looking on Amazon, and it was cheap, and I just thought, oh right, I'll just get that and see what it's all about. But it was just, I've discovered this since. I wasn't fully aware at the time because it was the first book I'd read on it, but it was so superficial, and a lot of the details were inaccurate. The writing, the prose was awful. It was I just don't know how it got published. Actually, thinking back, it's just it was a terrible book. It really was. It was just called, I think it was just called the D.B. Cooper Mystery or something like that. But anyway, it was awful. So I resolved to try and spend a bit more money and get some better books. So I also then got hold of the Into the Blast book about Kenny Christensen, and also the Gunther one, D.B. Cooper, What Really Happened. And then subsequently to that, because it kind of follows on from that, I got Marty Andretti's book, the Chasing the Last Lead.
That's a great book.
Yeah, yes, it is. Yeah, and read that, and then obviously, just started looking things up a bit more online, and just got a bit more into it. So yeah, that kind of, and then obviously I discovered yourself and the podcast and everything else that's wrapped up in that, the CooperCon event where we met last year, and sort of ended up where we're doing this with you now, which is fantastic. So, by the way, just on the subject of CooperCon, I mean, I know we're a few months after the fact now, but can I just put on record, my appreciation and thanks and congratulations to you and Eric for doing that, such a great job. It was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. It was well worth the trip, and it was. I'm sure you've had lots of pats on the backs and well wishes from everybody except Dan Grider in the time since. But hey ho, you can't please everybody.
No, you can't please everyone. I'm glad you had a great time since you flew halfway around the world to attend.
I think I never established it firmly, but I assume I may well possibly hold the record for the farthest, the furthest distance traveled to attend a CooperCon.
Yeah, I would say London area to the west coast of the United States is a pretty long ways.
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty bad because until a couple of weeks before the event, beforehand, I wasn't going. I didn't have a ticket, the flight, well, nothing, because of the COVID restrictions were only lifted over there a couple of weeks before the event, which was really lucky.
Good deal. Okay, now I got to ask you, what do you think of the Max Gunther book, D.B. Cooper, What Really Happened?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk to you a bit about that. I've made a few notes actually on. Just to bring up a few points on it. I really liked it. I thought it was a good read. I enjoyed reading the book, and I think the best way to sum it up, I think, it's a bit of an enigma, isn't it?
It sure is.
Yeah, and it's on. I mean, I've only read a few, but I haven't read by any means all or even most of the books that are written on Cooper. But it's unlike any of the other books, isn't it? In that it's not profiling a particular suspect, although it is in a way, but not a named suspect, who's identifiable, and neither is it giving like a specific kind of scientific angle or forensic angle on it. It's just, obviously it's this representation of from Max Gunther of his interactions, mostly obviously with the lady who's called Clara. And also briefly, obviously, with Cooper himself, allegedly. I think there's a lot. I've made some little notes and points here, just to the things that I wanted to discuss with you about it. But there are a lot. I've actually reread it just recently, or sort of briefly sort of nipped through, skim read through it in preparation for doing this, because I wanted to sort of refresh myself on it a bit. But there are a lot of, you could call them inaccuracies, errors, misrepresentations of things, of the event, and things that stand out that kind of suggest, well, maybe it's not a true document. Maybe this was invented. But then that's a strange concept, because by all accounts, this guy Max Gunther was like, an accredited professional journalist, well respected, had good standing, and also, why would he want to do something like that and fake something like that? It's a bit bizarre.
And if it's faked, it's not very interesting if it's fake. If you're going to make a fake DB Cooper story, you can make it much more interesting than that.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. Yeah, you're quite right there. Yeah. He didn't do a very good job if it is a fake, did he? No. But I don't, it's kind of, it's partly convincing, but then, as I say, there's bit, I mean, of course, it was written, we have to remember, I suppose it was written, was it 85, 86 or something like mid-80s?
I believe 85, yeah.
Yeah, so you're talking 30 or 35 years ago from now, and also 15 years after the facts as well, after the actual event. And of course, Max Gunther's no longer around to speak about it or answer for any of the information that's in it. But it's I just think, as I say, I reread it, and some of the things that stood out for me a little bit, that made me sort of question it. Its authenticity. Were some of the small details. I think Marty Andretti covers them a little bit as well. He mentions them in his book. He does a bit of a review of the Gunther text in his book. But for instance, one of the obviously we know that Cooper was partial to a bourbon and soda, or at least he seemed to be, because that's the drink. And he had a couple of those drinks on the plane, didn't he? But according to the book, to the Gunther book, he says that the only drink that Cooper ever liked was brandy.
That's right. I was thinking it was gin in my head for a second, but you're right. It's brandy.
It's brandy. He tells the girl Clara to get him a bottle of brandy from the shop. This is during his sort of convalescence period after the hijack, when he's staying with her. And it says, it's the only drink. It says it's the only drink he's ever truly liked. Now, you could say it's a small detail. It could have easily been kind of lost in, a miscommunication or translation down the years, whatever. But it's quite a specific thing. Considering, I mean, I think it's pretty certain that it was bourbon that he was served on the flight. So, is that a bit of a glaring error or oversight? I don't know, but it's just something that kind of jumps out at me and think, right, okay, well, that doesn't fit. Also, as well, the other another little item was, and it struck me, again, it may not be that significant, but it says when she challenges him about whether or not he is Cooper, and this could be, it's just, as again, the way Max Gunther's written it, how he's presenting the information. And of course, you've got to remember kind of what we're getting is like I suppose, a secondhand story from this lady called Clara, who alleges that she spent this time with Cooper. So it's all kind of, it's not firsthand and absolutely bona fide, verifiable stuff, and you have to accept that, I suppose. But what struck me is that in one of the chapters, when she challenges him about his true identity, she says to him, You're the famous hijacker, or I think the word is used. You're the infamous hijacker, DB Cooper, aren't you? And he says, apparently he didn't challenge, he didn't try to deny it. He just admitted and said yes. But he wouldn't. The thing to me was, unless, as I say again, Max Gunther just made a small error in detail. He would never have heard the term DB Cooper. He knew he put Dan Cooper on the ticket. So surely his response would have been, who? Who is DB Cooper? I'm Dan Cooper. Who is this DB guy? So, there's another small detail. Is it anything is it of any great significance? Maybe, I don't know. But, it's just something that stood out to me as being a bit of a kind of anomaly in the whole thing. And then there's other detail aspects to it as well that I found strange or a little bit of sort of anomalous. The way that it sounds like that they stayed in Clara was at this house, according to the book, looking after her uncle's house which is on the shore of a lake somewhere. In the area where, I think where you're originally from, but is it Woodland you're originally from in Washington?
Mm-hmm.
Right, which is sort of right in the midst of the identified area, isn't it?
It's the closest town to the drop zone.
So after a short while, I think days, if not days, and a couple of weeks, the FBI had kind of zeroed in on that area as being the search area, hadn't they?
Mm-hmm.
It didn't take them long to narrow it down to that. And so you would have thought, if he was still in that area, you would have thought they would have gone around every house and dwelling in that area and searched and spoken to people. And according to how I read it, what it seems to say in the Gunther book is that he lies low with her in that house for quite some time before they decide. And apparently, he's introduced, or she tells neighbours and friends that he's a cousin visiting from wherever, I don't know, the East or something. But it just strikes me as a little bit strange, and it would be something that would have been hard to kind of pass off at the time as just being, oh yeah, this is just this cousin of mine. He's visiting me. He's got nothing to do. I would have thought, if he was in the area, he would have wanted to get out of the area basically as quickly as possible. It doesn't sound like a wise thing to do, having just committed this crime of the century, to just hang around in the area where you've committed the crime for however. It's unspecific. I don't know how. It's hard to tell how long he's actually staying there in the house with her for. But to me, it doesn't sound like they clear out of there straight away. He's there with her for some time. So, and that is a strange one on me. I would have thought that she, as I say, you want to get out of there, and it's not a thing she's going to get. Why would she tell Max Gunther that if it wasn't true? You know what I mean? It's another thing about it that rings slightly untrue to me, that it doesn't seem very plausible. So yeah, there's several things about it. As I say, it's a really interesting book and a unique one on the case, but just several of these little details that just are quite striking. And another one. I was just writing it down here that I was going to mention as well. That seems, again, it could just be information being passed on that's not recorded properly, misinterpreted, whatever. But apparently, he tells her that Cooper tells Clara that the captain of the plane, Captain Scott, came out to speak to him and sat next to him on the flight, and he showed him the bomb. But in the process of the hijacking, and we just know that just didn't happen. None of the flight crew came out of the cockpit; they stayed in there, and the only crew that dealt with Cooper was the cabin crew behind. That is a definite, real misnomer. It just doesn't fit in at all. That is just totally wrong. So again, it's just one of those several small details which just don't ring true about it. And I suppose, as I say, you've got to allow for the fact that when it was written, how the information was relayed to him, possibly the state of mind of this lady Clara as well. Yeah, I don't know. It's one. I don't think anybody can really can come to a real solid conclusion on the Gunther book, can they? About how seriously to take it or not.
No, there are a few people in the vortex who have really looked into this book. Marty especially, and Dave have put a lot of time looking at this Gunther book. They've tried to get a hold of Max Gunther's relatives to see if he had any notes from writing this book. Maybe if they could figure out who Clara was. Like you said, it's just this total enigma. I mean, what are the odds that You have a gal staying alone in a cabin. She goes out to the woodshed. There's a man, an injured criminal in the woodshed. What are the odds that she then develops a relationship with that guy? That seems pretty low. And
Yeah.
but also, like you were saying about Max
And it
Gunther,
sounds like the stuff of fiction as well, like that it's a good story.
yeah, if my wife walked out to the woodshed and there was a wounded man in there, she's gonna run screaming the other direction. She's
True.
not going to be like, "Hey, dude, do you need a hand? Do you need some help?"
Yeah, although that said, I suppose that's 50 years ago. Maybe the world was a different place, and maybe that wouldn't be the initial reaction.
That's true. Yeah, and different people would have much different reactions to it.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
if I went out to my woodshed and there was a beautiful one wounded woman there, I'm not going to run away.
That sounds like a story you've tried to write.
Yeah, but it has cheesy music playing under it when I do it.
Yeah.
But the idea that you have a real serious journalist who releases this intentionally as nonfiction, and then he says in the book, I'm paraphrasing poorly because it's been a while since I've read it, but he basically says, this is the story that I've been told. I believe it to be true. I can't prove it, but I believe that it's true.
Yeah, you're right. That's essentially what he says. Yeah, and I suppose that makes you feel inclined to want to take him at face value on that. Yeah, it is a slightly. I mean, it kind of the whole thing is plausible. I think in the overarching kind of the thread of the book and the book as a whole, the story as a whole, is plausible. It's just these several, a lot of these small details which don't seem to quite be right and don't seem to quite fit. Then, of course, again, as I say, is it a case of secondhand information, years old, being passed, obviously the information secondhand to Clara from Cooper, and then she's passing it on third hand to Gunther. And of course, he's obviously done his own research and spoken to people around involved in the case as well to get more information from his off his own back. And yeah, I don't know. It's hard to come to a real sort of firm conclusion on it. But yeah, it was it's a good book to. I think it's a book that anybody interested in Cooper really should read. It's one of the sort of cornerstones of the whole, or the pillars of the whole Cooper facade. Cooper legend, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, there are a bunch of people who haven't read it or even have like a hostility towards reading it. Like, I'm not going to read that book. It's just lies and conjecture and it's a made up story. But I agree with you. I do think it is important if you're real interested in DB Cooper. There's this one book called DB Cooper, What Really Happened? And that book in itself is a mystery. I mean, we don't have Max Gunther around to ask him about the book.
No.
And we don't know who Clara is. We don't know who Dan LeClaire is.
The other one last thing just to mention on it while we're on the Gunther book that I've just seen in my notes here that I didn't not mention to you yet. The money. And this is quite a crucial detail there. The money, he claims that they laundered the money through casinos. So that's a big call, isn't it? Because I think the general consensus is that, well, obviously none of the money ever, apart from obviously the money at Tina Bar, none of the money's ever turned up anywhere. Is that because nobody's ever found it or because it was never spent? So, but the Gunther book comes down sort of specifically on one side of that argument, which is, yes, the money entered circulation. It was laundered through casinos, I think in various places. And but quite a long time after the fact. So it's kind of implies that was the reason that the money was never discovered. But I mean, obviously, you had the podcast with the guy, didn't you, who was the money expert, who said it would be virtually impossible for that money for none of it ever to be discovered if it was in the general circulation. So I don't, that's a big kind of bit, almost like a big. I mean, I know if you're taking it at face value, Gunther's just relaying what Clara's told him. But that's a big call, really, for the book to make, to say that all the money went into circulation and none of it has ever been discovered. And that's possibly the toughest thing to swallow for me, and the whole Gunther story. The fact that he claims that all the money entered circulation, because I don't know. You just kind of think somebody, if it was the whole, and well, that wasn't all of it, was it? Because they didn't retrieve all of it. So, somehow or other, some of it was lost forever in the woods, and they found about half of it, I think, didn't they? A bit more than half, according to what he says in the book, about 120,000, something like that. But virtually all of that was eventually, a few years down the line, but eventually laundered and put into circulation. So, I find that a bit hard to swallow, that if the whole lot, all of that money, 120 odd thousand, was in circulation eventually, that none of it ever turned up. I don't know. We'll never know, I suppose, and you can't come down on one side or the other 100%. But yeah, that for me is perhaps one of the boldest things about the book, if you like. The thing that sticks out the most is that it specifically says the money went into circulation. So what happened to it?
All right, you have to bet your rent money. Is the book real or is it fiction?
If I have to bet my rent money, I think I'd have to say that it was fiction, because I just don't trust it enough. I want to believe it's true, but I don't think it doesn't. Yeah, there's too many question marks hanging over it, and yeah, if I was really, if you were forcing me at gunpoint to come down on one side or the other, I think I'm going to have to say that I'm not sure that it is genuine. It's just, and I can't really tell you specifically why I think that, but it's just, I don't know. It's a bit of a hunch, I suppose. It just seems to have a lot of holes in it.
It's just another mystery inside the Cooper vortex.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's just added to he's added to the mystery, like it wasn't enough. Like there wasn't enough mystery involved to start with. I'll follow on from it though. Marty's, as you say, Marty's book is great, and that obviously goes into a lot of. And I think I spoke to Marty at CooperCon, along with several other people, which is another fantastic aspect to it, by the way. Having such a great cast of characters from the Cooper world there, that was brilliant. So I spoke to Marty about it, and he seemed, I don't know, I didn't speak to him at length about it, but it sounded like to me he kind of shifted his opinion a bit now, and he doesn't give as much credence as he used to do in terms of thinking that the Dan LeClaire suspect is actually Cooper.
I think that's correct.
Yeah. I don't. And as I say, I didn't get a chance to go and discuss it with him at that great length as to exactly why or what his alternative theory is now. But I don't know whether he's discovered a new suspect or somebody else, or whether there's just more information that's come to light that's made him doubt it, a bit more.
I think Dave has sort of picked up that torch, and maybe he's trying to connect William J. Smith to the Gunther book.
Yeah, Dave Feudman, that is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Who was going by anonymous, but has now outed himself.
Spoiler alert.
That's well, he's great. Another guy I spoke to at CooperCon and met. He's a great guy, Dave was. I must admit, I did like his suspect. I did like William J. Smith for a time. I thought he was onto something, but I've since slightly could have gone a bit cooler on that. I'm not so sure about it anymore. But I noticed it because he had a little website going, didn't he, Dave? He put something up on the web. He created a little website about it, and it's gone. They've taken it down. I think he said to do some updates on it, or more research or something. But I don't know where he is with that at the moment. I don't know whether you do, whether he's going to be putting something back up online, or whether he's had a change of heart, or what the situation is with that.
I'm not sure. I think he's still working on it. It's one of those suspects where you can get him to a certain point. Like, yeah, he matches the sketch. He has this military experience. We can sort of account for some of the particles on the tie this way. He has this connection and that connection. But you can't, like, if there was one suspect who we could say, oh yeah, and for sure he was at the Portland International Airport, November 24th, 1971, then it's completely different. But we don't have a single suspect that we can put at the airport or on that plane.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it, actually, to say that he's good. He's excellent up to a point, and then it starts to get a bit sketchy. I mean, I also as well, which is for me is almost a reason to kind of veer away from him. His resemblance to the sketch, the age profile sketch, the one that they did, which was aged by, I don't know whether it was maybe 30 years or something. And then there's that picture of William Smith of a similar kind of age from the newspaper clip or whatever, who almost looks identical to it. And you see that and you think, my God, wow, that's the guy. But then, but I think that is one of the, as with must be the case with all sorts of true crime stories. Matching a picture to a profile, an image, just because somebody looks like the suspect image is not necessarily, a good reason for believing they're the suspect.
Yeah, and in this case, we don't even have the image. We have a police sketch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, that's true. But as well, though, on that, I think, and I'm glad we've gone into this, because this is one of the things I've thought about a bit. Those two images, that they're referred to as the Bing Crosby and the
Cary Grant
sketch. Yeah. The trouble with them, and there's another. There's been another one since. There's another third one.
There's like 7 official sketches, I believe. So you have this initial one where I believe that one was from Florence, and it's real, like a real rough pen drawing. And Cooper looks mean and angry, and his face sort of pointed. And then you had the Bing Crosby sketch, with and without glasses. And then about a year later, they weren't getting any action off that sketch, so they went back and created another one, and that's the Cary Grant sketch. And then Unsolved Mysteries, I believe, did the age progression one.
Yeah, right. Well, for me, the thing with the images is, and I think this is probably, as I say, I think a general issue with identifying criminal suspects in the way that something that's changed over the years. What they do now, or they seem to do now, when you see, you watch crime documentaries and things on TV, the EFIT pictures that they come up with are all computer generated, but they don't actually look like a real person. They're kind of like a homogenized, a blend of the features that people have, that the witnesses and so on have described, and the computer puts them all together as, to sort of best represent how this person may look. But it doesn't actually, it doesn't look human. It doesn't actually look like a real human being. It looks like a slightly odd representation of a person. Whereas the Cooper sketches, the FBI sketches, and presumably this was how things was done back in those days, even though they look like a real person, even though that person doesn't exist. If you see what I'm trying to say, Cooper does not look exactly like any of the sketches that have ever been done of him, does he? The real
Probably
Cooper.
not.
No, but the thing is, but those sketches look like a specific person. So that's the kind of, people see that, and then that's what they're looking for in Cooper. But of course, he doesn't actually look like that, because that's just an artist's impression, and that actual image, what you see, just that person doesn't exist. So for me, I think it's dangerous to link suspects too firmly just based on the image profile and the resemblance to the sketches. Obviously, it's going to be similar. It's not going to look like a completely different person. He's not going to look like, I don't know. It's not like Donald Trump, is he, or whoever? But it's not going to look exactly like any of the images either, which can be misleading, and I think can sometimes, give certain suspects who've been proposed, give them maybe a bit more weight than that they might actually merit.
I think that's definitely true, especially, the Bing Crosby sketch and the Cary Grant sketch. Those don't look alike. Those don't look like the same person.
No,
so
that's true.
You can, if you have a suspect, if you're trying to push your grandpa being D.B. Cooper on me, Rob, you could say, well, he looks a lot like the Cary Grant sketch. My grandpa looks just like him, but he doesn't really look like the Bing Crosby sketch. So you could
True.
sort of pick which sketch your suspect matches better.
Yeah, very true. Yeah. So I kind of veered away from William Smith a bit because I thought, well, yeah, that could be, you can get caught up in the fact that he looks similar to the sketch. Yeah, one or two other aspects as well of William. I think the motive's slightly questionable, isn't it? With the train thing, the railroad bankruptcy, it's a little bit of a hard link. It's, tough link for me to go from that to hijacking an airliner. And yeah, it's kind of hard to make the connection, I think. And also as well, the name Dan Leclerc in the Gunther book, which I think Dave was linking to William with, because he's got a friend of his was called Dan Clare, hasn't it? I can't remember the exact connection now, but
that sounds about right.
Yeah, that he's got that. He connects the name with Dan, but of course, Dan Leclerc is just a made-up name. Gunther just made the name up, didn't he? It's a pseudonym he gives because he doesn't know what his name actually was.
Maybe.
So Dan Leclerc is just invented, and I thought, well, Dave seemed to be making this connection with this guy called Dan Clare, who was a friend of William Smith's, and that's what made why he was saying he was a potential involvement in it. But for me, yeah, I don't know whether I don't know whether he took the name, he misinterpreted the fact that the Dan Leclerc name as being actual true name, of the suspect, whereas obviously it was just made up by Gunther. So Dan Leclerc is just a made up name.
Yeah, there's weird details in that book where you think, okay, based on this information, I can start looking. I remember the first time I read it, I thought, okay, well, there's probably only a dozen lakes in and around the drop zone. So let me go looking for cabins and see sort of where he could have landed. And, I think I drew a sketch of what I thought the place looked like based on the book, and then got on Google Earth, and I'm going to solve this case myself. And that's so fruitless. Every house is the same from the sky, and there's probably only a handful of places around the drop zone where you can have a house on the lake.
Did you still, when you discovered Cooper, were you still living in that area, or had you moved away then?
When I got real heavy into it, I had moved away. But
okay.
I went to DB Cooper days at the Ariel store a few times, but I was just there to drink. I wish I could go back in time now and know, like, hey, Bruce Smith was there, and I think Robert Blevins was there one year. Galen Cook, these people who now I love to hang out and talk with. The idea that I was in the same room as them and didn't care at all, it kind of bugs me now.
Yeah, but hey, I mean, it would have been good fun to be there. They looked like such fantastic fun, those events.
They were a blast. I mean, this bar in the middle of nowhere, one night a year, it was just absolutely packed. You'd park on the road and walk in the pitch black through the woods to get to this bar because you couldn't get close enough.
It sounds amazing. Yeah.
It was a cool place.
And unfortunately now does the place still exist? Is it in a state of disrepair? Is it been sold to somebody? It's no longer a bar. Do you know what happened to it?
I know the couple that purchased it. I think they really want to get it operational again, but that's it's quite the chore.
Yeah, mate, I imagine so. Yeah, no, but that must have been some of it just looks like a bit of kind of like a time capsule thing, just sort of set in looks like something that's come from a bygone era.
Oh, 100%. And I used to, when I worked in that area, I would drive by, and Donna sort of towards the end, the hours were, if the lights are on, we're open. If the lights aren't on, we're closed. Those were the hours. And so I would drive by, and if it was open, I'd swing in, and it was cash only, which, towards the end became inconvenient. Like, who has cash anymore?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, of course.
But it was a cool place.
And of course, there's always the speculation that there's always been out down the years as to whether the real Cooper actually ever showed up there.
Oh yeah, and Brian Woodruff,
Which is really fun to kind of speculate on.
Oh yeah, and Brian Woodruff got these letters in the mail. I'm not sure if it was every year or every few years, but he believed those letters were from DB Cooper, and he showed them to me one year. I think he got this letter, and the guy mailed him $50. It was like, hey, enjoy my anniversary. Have a drink on me. And I don't know if that's someone just screwing around with Brian in the Ariel store getting a laugh, or if it was
check
real.
The serial numbers?
It was a 50.
Oh, 50. Oh, right. Okay, sure. Yeah. I suppose, yeah, a little bit of a history from a bygone age. But yeah. So anyway, where were we?
Let's go to the flight path.
Ah, right. Cool. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. It's good that you know what you're doing. You can implement a little bit of structure to this chat, because it's easy just to go off down a tangent and just start rabbiting on about different aspects. Before you know it, you're talking about something that's completely got nothing to do with the case. So that nobody wants to listen to it either. Yeah, flight path. Okay. I think, I've obviously aware of Eric's position on this, and I've been watching with interest some of the stuff he's been putting up about his exploits on Tina Bar and what he thinks about the flight path and everything. But I'm not with him. I think, I'm not saying it's 100% spot on, but I'm not sure that there's enough strong reasoning to not believe the official FBI, well, FAA, I suppose, as well, isn't it? FBI, FAA flight path, what is provided, which is essentially, it's the Victor 23 airway, isn't it, really? That's what they're saying he flew down.
Yeah.
For me, it seems plausible. I don't think there's enough, because it seems like the only reason that you really need for motive, if you like, for believing that the flight path is wrong, is to explain how the money got to Tina Barn. So, because obviously the Western flight path, which is Eric's proposal, isn't it, is more or less, pretty much looks like a straight line virtually all the way down, straight across the top, over the top of Tina Bar and further down. And obviously that's how he believes the money ended up there. I don't happen to believe that's how the money got there, but I won't digress into that just now, because I'm sure we'll come on to the money shortly. But no, I believe I think, and the other thing as well, just referring it back to CooperCon, what reinforced my opinion on this is hearing from Cliff Ammerman at CooperCon, which was fantastic to get him there, and it was really interesting listening to him. And I spoke to him myself, just personally as well, just briefly afterwards. He seemed convinced that was the route he was taking, and he went as far as to say he could see him making turns on his radar. At least I think that's what he meant, unless I've misinterpreted it. That were consistent with the Victor 23 airway. So, for me, that's good enough for me, kind of thing. It's I was already inclined to believing that the FBI flight path was true, or near enough, and then to have him reinforce it at CooperCon was enough, give it enough weight for me to think that, yeah, that's believable. I don't see that there's anything strong enough evidence to suggest that it wasn't true. So I would go along with the FBI flight path there by the associated drop zone area. So
the drop zone, you believe that's accurate too?
Yeah, again, more or less. Of course, you've got to remember, and I think Cliff himself said this, didn't he, at CooperCon? The technology they had at the time, it's not going to be absolutely spot on to within like 10 meters or something like that, but it's going to be roughly within, say, a mile or something like that, maybe a couple of miles at the most, you would think. Particularly because that was a pretty dangerous thing to do, really, flying an airliner at just 10,000 feet in a region in the dark, in bad weather, in a mountainous region. You're going to be pretty certain of where you're going and what you're trying to avoid, haven't you?
Yeah, crashing into a mountain would be a bummer.
Yeah, and the flight crew sounds like, particularly Captain Scott sounds like the kind of guy. He sounds like the ultimate professional. All right, they were under a stressful situation. It was a highly unusual situation, and they were kind of probably making some things up as they went along. I'm talking about everybody when I say that, because it was unprecedented, wasn't it? The FBI, the police, the FAA, the Air Force, the crew, they would have been kind of acting on the hoof a little bit. But also, the guy's a professional pilot. He knows what he's doing. He's probably flown that route in that area several times. Even under those circumstances of pressure and stress and worry, obviously, I suppose. I'd be surprised if he just flew in a straight line, in the Western flight path in the dark, not really knowing exactly what was in front of him. I just don't see that. I think he stuck to the Victor 23 airway pretty much.
Do you think Cooper survived his jump?
Oh, here's a good one. Yes, I do, because really because nothing was ever found apart from the money. For him to die, the only way that can happen for me is if he doesn't pull the ripcord and he plummets straight into a body of water, whether it's the Columbia, whether it's Lake Merwin, whether it's one of the other rivers, whatever, and drowns and is never discovered. Because any other scenario, if he obviously, I think he survived, so I think he landed. He may well have got injured a bit, but he managed to get out the area, took stuff with him, hid it, whatever, and that's why, and then lay low and just never surfaced. That's why nothing was ever found. The only other explanation why nothing was ever found is, as I say, is if he didn't pull the ripcord and just ended up falling into a body of water and drowning, and all the stuff, the parachute and everything else went with him, and was either washed out to sea or it's just got buried in the sediment at the bottom of the river or the lake or whatever, wherever he actually ended up. Because that would explain why nothing's ever found. If he pulled the ripcord and the parachute deploys, even if he dies, either from injury on landing or exposure and just can't get out of the woods and dies of dehydration, whatever, in the woods, somebody finds something.
I agree.
Do you agree? Yeah, I think I've heard you say that before. There's no way, especially a whopping great big parachute, it's just, and even if he lands in the water with the parachute deployed, even if he drowns, there and again, the parachute gets found, because that's going to float, isn't it? You would think.
Yeah, I would think so. There'd be they searched Lake Merwin with a submarine. And I agree with you. I think there is some chance of a no pull and he's not found. Because if it's a no pull, even on land, you'd have to walk over that specific spot to exactly find him, and time has gone on. However, if you read Marty's book, Finding DB Cooper, Chasing the Last Lead, the number of no pulls is statistically very, very small.
Yeah.
And if you pull and your parachute opens, the odds that you survive is very, very high.
Yeah, he was really thorough on that, wasn't it? I was impressed with that research he did onto that, into the RAF's jumps in World War II. It was really, it was a great bit of research and diligence to look into that.
Oh, absolutely. And what better comparison? You have these guys in planes that are being shot down, and some of them had one or two jumps. Most of them just had classroom training, like, hey, this is your parachute, this is the string that you pull on for it to open, and hopefully you'll land on your feet. And then they're doing it being shot down at night.
Yeah, sure. So they've got the added threat of the Germans shooting at them. I mean, Cooper didn't have anybody trying to shoot him down, as far as we know. So, the chase planes, you never saw him, so they weren't a threat. But yeah, sure. And so they're, like I say, they're in the dark. They don't know where they're landing. They can't see where they're landing. And the vast majority, never mind survive, they survive uninjured. So as you said that, yeah, even if he doesn't pull the cord and lands on land, something would have been found somewhere by somebody by now. Just going back though to the reason why I think he may not have pulled the cord. It's only a slim chance, but it is a real chance. He could have had a heart attack at the time when he was jumping out. I mean, that's not beyond the realms of possibility, because it was a stressful situation. guys of that age in the 70s, he smoked, he drank, he probably wasn't, although he would, by all accounts, he would have been a fairly lean guy, probably in reasonable condition, probably fairly fit. There would have been a high possibility under such a stressful situation, no matter how calm he came across and appeared to be handling the situation with such, composure and almost seemed relaxed at times. It would have been, he would have been on edge. The adrenaline would have been pumping. It's impossible for it not to have been. So it's a real possibility that he could have possibly had a heart attack during the actual execution of the jump, and then being incapacitated and not being able to pull the ripcord. Or, of course, the parachute could have failed, but that's even less likely, I think.
Boy, if he has a heart attack, what an embarrassing ending to the story.
Yeah. Nobody wants. Don't get me wrong. Nobody wants that. That is no. We don't. I mean, you could probably never prove that anyway now, even if something was found. But no. It's just. But that, to me, that's why I think the most likely scenario is that he survived and got out of there, because the only way he didn't is if that happened, basically, and that's a pretty slim possibility. I would give that a 5% chance, maybe, of being the actual event, the way that the events unfolded.
Here's a wild left turn, but you're in the UK. It's safe to say that.
It certainly is. Yeah.
How many people do you run into where it's like, hey, do you want to talk about DB Cooper?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, no, not very many. One or two people. But since I've got into this, one or two people. Nobody of my own age or younger. Oh, sorry, no, beg your pardon. One friend of mine who is the same age as me is aware of it and has heard of it, but doesn't really know much about it or is interested in it. But other than that, there's a couple of other people at work through work, older than me, about 20 odd years older than me. They're about 60 odd now. They were aware of it and they'd heard of it, and I thought there was an interesting thing, but never really looked into it that deeply, and don't really know a great deal about it. But very few. No, it's my parents. I spoke to my parents about it. Obviously, that I mentioned to them. I told them I was going last year, and they didn't know about it. And they were. I think it was. I mean, I don't know. I think it was publicised here at the time. I'm sure it would have been. I think it was publicised around the world, wasn't it? It was a pretty remarkable thing at the time. But I think just because in the meantime, nothing has ever been. There's been no developments really, and no. The case hasn't really been able to be progressed any further along. It's probably just passed out of people's general consciousness, and it's very cult over here now. Although and I think I mentioned this to you when we were at CooperCon, the profile got raised a bit year before last now, 2020, when the documentary was on, the HBO BBC one, and then that was on BBC, and then there was a bit of radio coverage as well on Radio 5 Live over here, which is BBC. That's quite prominent, that's a nationwide thing, and they did quite a long program on it. So I'd probably raised the profile a little bit, and it's maybe got a little bit of because around the 50th anniversary and everything, it's maybe got a little bit more garnered a bit more attention than in preceding years. But generally, no, it's low profile here. And I think unless something major develops, or i.e., something is found or his identity is revealed, it's probably not going to really gain much, prominence over here. In the States. Well, it doesn't really have that much prominence in the States anymore, I don't think, does it? Apart from in that region up in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, outside of Portland, Seattle area. If I walk out my front door in Colorado here and start asking people, hey, do you know about DB Cooper? Certainly everyone my age is going to say no. Or they'll say, oh, you mean that thing that was in Loki for 60 seconds? But yeah, it's not the most popular thing going on over here. What was the reaction when you told people that you were going to travel to Portland, Oregon to go to a DB Cooper conference?
They kind of said, what? Where? Why? Yeah, there was a bit of a few heads, some raised eyebrows and a bit of head scratching. Most of my friends and people I know, probably think I'm a bit weird anyway. So I'm sure you can relate to that. So they just kind of shrugged and said, well, hey, have a good time, enjoy it.
How dare you make that comparison? How dare you?
I think everybody who's in any way invested in this and got any certain level of interest in it is well, not weird. That's the wrong word to use. I don't know. Eccentric, maybe to a certain degree, or
yeah, that's a much friendlier word. Eccentric.
You know where I'm going.
Why do you think this is still unsolved?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, but because he did it so well, maybe is probably the best answer to that. Because he accomplished it so well, and I mean, if going along, as I say, I'm inclined to believe that he got away with it and survived. So the answer to that is because he did it bloody well, and whether that was through design, more by design or by good fortune, or probably a combination of both. He covered his tracks well, obviously he slipped. There's a couple of minor errors or slip ups, obviously leaving the tie behind. Although he probably, I don't know whether that was deliberate or just accidental. He probably didn't think much of it anyway. Even if he was conscious of leaving it behind, back in those days, obviously there was no such thing as DNA. So he would probably think, well, what can they pick up from a tie? He wouldn't have known anything about the minute particles and what was discovered on it later on. So, I think really he just planned it well, he executed it well, and he kept his head down and protected his identity ever since. I think is really why it's no, and probably as well maybe lack of, well, who am I to judge the competency of the FBI, but maybe a slight lack of competency or, energy and vigor and application on the part of the FBI and the police maybe is another reason. But as I say, I'm not really in a position to judge that. Although, that could be possibly one of the reasons, as you say. Why? I mean, they've thrown the towel in basically now, haven't they? They've decided, 5 years ago, whatever it was, it's no longer an active case. So they've admitted.
But they gave
defeat.
It 45 years.
Well, they did. That's true. And I mean, you think to yourself, well, hey, why not go out with why 45? Why not wait till 50? And just sort of. They could have announced it at CooperCon, at the 50th anniversary.
They should have done that.
Yeah.
FBI, if you're listening, why didn't you have the foresight to do it at the 50th anniversary?
Absolutely, yeah. Although it would, as it turned out, no, that's right. No, sorry, it was the 50th. Well, yeah, I was thinking it was delayed by a year because of COVID, but it wasn't. It was the 50th anniversary, wasn't it? Last year, yeah. 2171, yeah.
Rob, what do you think it will take to solve this case?
Well, interestingly enough, I just watched one of the little video snippets that Eric does and that he puts on the Facebook, on YouTube as well, on the Facebook group. The latest one, and I didn't know anything about this. He mentions apparently that they found one of Cooper's hairs that was stuck on the seat cover on the back of the headrest on the seat, which was discovered at the time and kept as evidence, and apparently got lost somehow or other in the meantime, in the intervening years, in transit somehow between the FBI lab at, is it called Quantico?
Yeah.
Is that where the FBI headquarters, I presume that is, and the field office at Seattle, or whichever one it was going, they were going backwards and forwards between. And obviously, as the same scenario seems to have happened with the cigarette butts, doesn't it? And some other, I think, aspects of evidence as well that over the years have been lost or, I don't know, misappropriated, whatever term you want to use. But I didn't know about that. And that sounds really, so apparently he's trying to do a bit of research into that, I think, at the moment, and see if he can discover what happened to that, because he reckons now with modern DNA capabilities, they could actually, if they still had that hair, which they believe came from Cooper, they could actually come up with possibly an identity for him, with modern methods.
Yeah, at the very least, we could come up with, okay, he's part of this family tree.
Yeah. So maybe that really is a potential. You never know. It's something, but I think something like that. I know Marty mentioned as well about the publication of the census data and being able to narrow down names through that in a certain. I don't know when the one that covers I think he was on about looking at deaths recorded, so, and using names from that. I'm not sure. I've got this slightly confused now. Trying to just recollect from what he said when I spoke to him at CooperCon and what I've read in his book. But I'm sure he said there's a potential in future years, not just yet, but in future years when census data's catalogued and published from that period and since, that there'd be a potential to identify quite a small number of potential candidates from that information and from the names on there. So maybe there's a possible route to shedding more light on it through that. But yeah, other than that, who knows? Because I mean, one thing we can say, I think, with certainty is that he's no longer around now. I mean, even if he didn't die at the time in the actual act of the hijacking, he's got to have died since, surely, because he's got to be nearly 100 now if he's still alive. Going off the the age profile, what is generally accepted, mid-40s.
Yeah, not many chain smokers from the 70s are alive today in their late 90s.
Yes, so he's likely to have passed on by now, and so it's highly unlikely that there's going to be a sudden revelation, i.e., a deathbed confession, which you just can't give any credence to anyway.
Not anymore. If there was just one deathbed confession, then okay, well, exactly. That's really interesting. But we've had dozens. Sure, yeah, and to me, I mean, he didn't strike me as being the kind. If he'd executed it and kept his counsel all these years, or however many years, until his death, and kept quiet and just not told, it just doesn't seem to fit in with Cooper's. Obviously we don't really know very much about him, but the kind of, I mean, he's almost been given a personality, I think, hasn't he? And been given a character, that's been ascribed to him over the years by the Cooper world, the Cooper, well, not just the Cooper vortex, but the Cooperverse. That was the term I was looking for. Because there's very little, obviously, solid information and verifiable information known about this guy. But because of the story that's been told and the information that's been relayed, obviously, and also the way the legend evolved over the years, he's been given a character. It almost feels like, I think, to a lot of us involved in this, it's almost like you kind of know him. Almost feel like his character, and or at least you what you assume to be his character, and you kind of identify him as identify with the person, the persona of Cooper. So that's why I say I just don't think a deathbed confession fits in with my image and perception and feeling for the guy. It just wouldn't be his style, if I can put it like that. Yeah, I think that's well said. Tessa D'Amico was on the show, and she said, if you confess to the crime, you're out as a suspect, in my opinion. That's right. Yeah, I listened to that one. Yeah, and I'm inclined to agree with her. Yeah, I must admit. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, just why wait until you're dead? You would have told if you wanted to get your story out there, if you wanted it, you would have let slip something to somebody, and I just don't buy it. No, deathbed confessions. It just doesn't stack up. I know there's obviously, that you could argue that, well, it's too dangerous to tell anybody until, because of the what was that term? What's the thing? Where the John Doe indictment. Yeah. So, and which he presumably would have been aware of, so that even 40 odd years or whatever after the fact, he could still have been charged and arrested and tried for the case. Yeah, okay, that is a fair point to make for a reason. But then again, no, I just don't see it, because are you not implicating? He's gonna, if he does that, you leave behind surely jeopardy for your family members and your close friends, don't you? Possibly, yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't sound like the kind of guy to do that. No, I just can't subscribe to the deathbed confession theory. I'm sorry, not least because most of the suspects, as far as I'm aware, who seem to have made deathbed confessions, I just don't buy as suspects. I mean, they are suspects, but I don't buy as being, bona fide contenders for being Cooper anyway. So partly it's to do with that as well. Why do you think so many people have confessed to this crime? Well, I think a lot of people confess to a lot of crimes, don't they, that they haven't committed. It's kind of a bit of a thing for a certain type of individual. But
this one, obviously, the potential is there because of the lack of information, the lack of well, because it's not being solved, and because it's been an open-ended case for so long, it almost invites people, doesn't it, who are who maybe want to leave a bit of a bit of a legacy or something, or maybe want a bit more notoriety than they achieved in their lives. It's kind of a tempting thing, you can kind of understand the mindset really of somebody wanting to do that. And yeah, and because I suppose there's not a lot of challenge to it, and it's hard to say, oh well, no, he definitely wasn't Cooper because of this, because there's so little certainty in the case. So it's if you're going to confess to a crime that you haven't committed, it's a good one to confess to, because you may well become a cult hero as well.
Well said. Do you think that he chose the name Dan Cooper as an homage to the comic book?
Absolutely. I was looking forward to this question because it's one of the things I really feel the most strongly about. 100%. That was where it came from. Now, I don't know exactly how, he discovered it. Obviously, it's well known to be a thing that was of limited circulation. It was only in French, I believe, wasn't it? The comic. What was it called? The comic book? It was actually called Dan Cooper.
Dan Cooper. Yeah, I've seen it. I've seen it in French, and I've seen it in Spanish.
Okay, right. Well, it was not, but according to general consensus, it's not been translated into, or certainly not, published in English.
No, not for years later. I have a Dan Cooper book that's in English that it's from like 1989 or something, where it's a collection of the comics.
Okay.
In English.
Yeah. So obviously, it's kind of obscure, and he would have to mean that he would have to have either discovered it, which I think is generally accepted. It sounds pretty likely that Cooper did serve in World War II, or had military service at least, and could well have been over in Europe around the time that comic was around, or could have been aware of it. If he was of French Canadian descent, it's obviously it's not like it's not like it's the Bible of sort of it's not like it's Time magazine, is it? But it's obviously fairly obscure. But here's the thing with it for me: the chances of him coming up with that name by random, and it just so happens to be this comic book hero who jumps out of planes. And I think, is there not one comic where he actually does it in a business suit? I'm sure I've seen a picture of he's actually in a business suit. Actually looks like Cooper, so it has to be, it just has to be. For me, it's because also as well, it's Dan Cooper, not Daniel Cooper. And if he's just plucking names at random, and I would have thought, okay, I know America's always been less formal than here, and slightly more, well, relaxed in terms of social attitudes than here. But I would have thought in that period of time, in the 60s, 70s, certainly here, you probably refer to yourself as Daniel Cooper than Dan Cooper. And I would have thought probably the same in the States. It would be more, particularly if you fit in like a document, like an airline ticket. I know he didn't write it. He told the desk agent, didn't he? But I would have thought he would have said Daniel Cooper, not Dan Cooper. So for me, it's just far too much of a coincidence for that to be a random. And to be honest with you, it really puzzles me. And the number of times, because a lot of you ask this question a lot, and a lot of people you've had on the podcast, in fact, more than I would have expected, have said that they don't think it's connected, and that always surprises me, because I think it's one of the most solid features of the whole case. It's it just that's what I was that's what I thought I was going to mention to you, because you said to me when we were talking about setting this up about how you did the Zoom call with Robert Edwards, the Brit who you had on, who did the book, the Flight 305 book, who was published last year.
Yeah, he was in Transylvania though.
Oh, was he? Right, fancy that. Wow. Fair enough. As is his one. But anyway, right. So his name, right, Dr. Robert Edwards. That's his first name and his surname. My given names, my surname, my first and second names are Robert Edward. Okay. Now, how many British people have you had on this podcast?
Well, with you, it will be 2.
There you go. So that's a coincidence. You see, we're both British. we've both done this podcast with you on Zoom, and we both have the names Robert Edward. That's a coincidence, okay? Choosing the name Dan Cooper from a random choice of hundreds of names, when you're about to hijack a plane, wearing a suit and bail out, and this guy happens to be a comic book hero who does the same thing. I'm sorry, that is not a coincidence. That is planned.
I agree with you 100%. And
thank you.
It's I've used that example before. Like, if I robbed a train and I escaped on a skateboard and my ticket said Tony Hawk, do you think that's a coincidence? Or do you think I'm doing an homage to Tony Hawk?
Good one. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, quite right. So I think we've nailed that one there, haven't we?
I think we have. We've solved it. It's official.
And also as well, I just think it's in keeping with his character as well. You know, with a little bit of humor, a little bit of a sort of kind of slight lightheartedness about the whole affair almost. You know, just making that reference there. It's just in keeping with the whole kind of cut of his jib, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. All right. Now for the really hard question. Rob, how did the money get to Tina Barr?
Right. Okay. Here's another aspect where I like to think that I'm on fairly firm ground, as it were. And that's because, as I said to you before, that this is why I don't believe in the alternative flight path scenario, because I don't think you need it to explain why the money got to Tina Barr, because I think it wasn't because of the flight path. The reason why it ended up there, I didn't realize this. I didn't notice this the first time around, but Gunther actually mentions this in his book. And apparently, one of the sheriffs at the time, I can't remember the name. One of the sheriffs who was investigating it at the time proposed this thing, which is the same thing that I've assumed just off my own back, not because I've read it anywhere or heard anybody else say it, but I just thought about it and thought, because the thing is, I think a lot of the time, and particularly with this case and with probably most crime cases and mysteries, it's easy to make things more complicated than they need to be. Would you say?
Yeah.
And just in general in life, I mean, you're a man of a certain age now, and I'm suggesting nothing by that. So you must have discovered that a lot of the time things are more simple than they turn out to be, pretty more simple and straightforward and mundane than they might initially appear to be.
Yeah, I think that's safe to say.
Yeah. So the money, I don't think it got there by, any human intervention. I don't think it was the Washougal washdown theory, as bizarre as that seems. And I certainly don't think Dwayne Webber threw it off the bridge and it ended up traveling down the river and depositing itself there. I think it's a really simple explanation, really. I actually ran this by Tom Kay at CooperCon, and he basically sort of said, yeah, there's no reason why that couldn't happen. I just think he dropped the bundle of money in the aircraft as he was exiting it, because, which could easily be done. I mean, you imagine the howling wind, blowing around, the noise, the chaos that would have been going on in there. And the fact that he got this sort of undesirable little duffel bag that he had to tie up to fit all the money in, rather than a backpack to carry the money. It could have easily dropped one of the bundles, or it fell out of the bag as he was leaving the plane. It drops on the top of the stairs or one of the steps, and then remains there for a bit after Cooper's jumped. The steps are moving up and down in the wind, in the airflow. The money gradually works its way down the steps and either falls or is blown off just as the aircraft is passing over the Columbia, a bit further along the flight path, just over. Can't quite remember exactly where it passes over the river now on the FBI flight path, but it's not far from Portland Airport, is it? Somewhere around
real
there.
Close.
Yeah. So it falls out there and lands on the riverbank, where it stays until the flood in 72, which comes along. There was the spring flood, wasn't there?
Yes, I think there was one in 72 and another in 76.
Right. Yeah. But crucially, the Tom Kay's findings about the diatoms indicating that it was not exposed to water in the winter, but it was in the water in the spring. So the money rests on the riverbank. Then they have the flood in the spring, picks up the money where it's laying undiscovered, because it might, it could be in some reeds or some bushes or whatever, out of view. So nobody discovers it. So the water rises, picks up the money. It travels a bit along the river in the direction of Tina Bar, because that's the way it flows in it towards the Pacific Ocean, and then gets deposited at Tina Bar. The water then recedes, after the flood, and it gets a bit of sediment gets put on top, a bit of sand, as the natural processes in a river, big river like the Columbia, and it's buried there, and that's where it stays until Brian Ingram discovers it in 80, was it 1980?
Yeah.
And there you go. And to me, that to me, I can't think of a simpler explanation, really, that kind of covers what it needs to cover. That would explain why they've only got Tom only found the spring diatoms on the money, and how it got there. So you don't need an alternative flight path. You don't need any human involvement for burial. And that's it. That's my theory on the money.
I like it.
There's no way of obviously verifying it, now. I could be just completely barking up the wrong tree, but to me, that as I say, a lot of the time things are overcomplicated unnecessarily, and I just would subscribe to the more simpler possible explanation, which I think that is. I don't think he buries it anyway. Aside from the fact that that's how I think it got there. I cannot see him burying it anywhere. After he's gone through what he's gone through to get that money, you've just committed the crime of the century, so to speak. You've got 200 grand. You've made the landing. You've done it basically. You are not letting that money out of your sight, are you? Seriously? I just don't think he's going to bury it somewhere and leave it.
Yeah, I agree. Burying money is such like a stereotypical trope in movies. Like, does anyone store their money by burying it?
No, I don't.
I don't know anyone else that does.
So, of course, if you're going along that line of thought, then of course he's got to. If he's not burying it, he's got a fair bit of bulk to carry and conceal and take with him. All right, he's got the problem of that, but I think that's far more preferable than leaving it to potentially be discovered or forgetting where you buried it and never finding it again.
Right. And now you're returning to the scene of the crime to
that as well.
Get the money, which that seems more suspicious than you just walking out of the woods with a duffel bag in the first place.
Definitely. Yeah. Excuse me, sir. What are you looking for? Oh, just some animal eggs or something. I don't know. But of course, this is assuming that he manages to hold onto the money.
Yes.
And, that's the other aspect. Yeah, of course, we all want him to, and I want to believe he did get away with it. But it's quite a real possibility that I know you don't particularly want to spend much time talking about Dan Grider, but you would have seen his video that he produced before Christmas, about his opinions and views on the case. And
I watched it. I watched the premiere. I watched it the second it came out.
Really? Right. Okay. Yeah. I must admit, to give him, I know and certainly, I'm not going to raise this. I'm sure it's not something you don't want to spend any time discussing, but I know you and Eric have had your kind of differences with him in the intervening time since.
Well, he wanted me to publicly state that he solved the case.
Well, he hasn't though, has he?
I don't believe so.
No, he definitely hasn't. But nevertheless, I must admit, I thought it was pretty cool what he did there. That jump over recreated it on the 50th anniversary, dressed as Cooper with the jumping out with the money and everything. I thought that was quite. I did find that quite.
I like Dan Grider. I liked his documentary he made. It's on YouTube. It's called DB Cooper, a family story, something like that.
Deep Family Secrets.
Deep Family Secrets. You're right. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, I watched
DB
it. Yeah.
Cooper, Deep Family Secrets. I think it's good. I love watching DB Cooper stuff. If you're listening and you make a movie about DB Cooper, you don't have to tell me to watch it. I'm going to watch it on my own. Trust me.
Yeah. But he demonstrated, though, as I say, he demonstrated in how difficult it would be to actually hold on to the money. So, I think it is a real possibility that he did lose the money, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a possibility as well. What do you think of his suspect, Richard McCoy?
No, I was surprised, actually. I didn't see that coming. It's almost like a documentary of two halves, I thought. and I enjoyed it. It was good. It was entertaining, but I didn't. You had no idea what suspect he was going to propose until all of a sudden he revealed it, and then obviously presented his kids, Richard McCoy's children, in the documentary as well. But I was quite shocked when he came up with McCoy. I just didn't see it going that way at all, because I just don't think it is. No, definitely not. 100% it's not McCoy. There's so many reasons, which you've discussed on several previous podcasts. But the main ones really being his age and appearance, just didn't match. The big ears, the balding head. I know, there's potential for disguise and so forth, but I think they would have been more prominent in the suspect description. But the main thing for me, which disqualifies Richard McCoy, obviously the theory goes that he did it again because he lost the money the first time, and so he did it again. And apart from the fact that he got caught a few days after, he executed it successfully and kept the money the next time. But I just think, you wouldn't. It's too soon. It was 4 or 5 months after the original one.
Yeah.
It's still far too that you're going to leave. If you're going to do it again, you're going to lie low for longer than that. There's no way you would do it again so soon. I just don't buy it.
Do you think there's a possibility that McCoy knew Cooper?
Not really, no. I've heard that. I don't really know where that comes from.
It comes from me. I'm the only one floating that theory.
Well, say no more. That's fair enough. That's good enough for me if it comes from you, mate. No, I don't think he did. I don't think there's any specific evidence to suggest that is that, and it's hard to say. It's hard to really subscribe to that, seeing as we don't know who Cooper was. You mean just because it just there's a connection, and he took advice from him or something, or he wanted to better him and do it, for more money? I don't know.
I think there are a few things that McCoy improved upon over Cooper's hijacking. He gave more specific flight instructions. He brought his own parachute on board.
Right. Yeah.
His execution of the plan was not nearly as smooth as Cooper, who was famously calm, cool, and collected. McCoy drew attention to himself. He was sloppy. But the idea that McCoy and Cooper knew each other, and maybe Cooper was even like, hey, here's where I screwed up. You got to give more specific flight instructions, and they're going to be putting trackers in the parachutes now, so bring your own aboard. It's wild speculation on my part. There are some...
It's a fair argument. Yeah. It's a fair argument to make, though.
That Wolfgang Gossett, Ted Braden, maybe there's potential they were running in the same circles, may have known each other. Braden and McCoy were both special forces in Vietnam.
Yeah, special, right. Yeah, I know. Yeah. I thought you were going to make that connection. Yeah, quite possibly. Because I don't think. Ted Braden, is it Wolfgang Gossett or William Gossett?
Both. He was born William Gossett, and then later in life became Wolfgang.
Okay, but it's the same guy. Okay,
yeah,
right, sure. Yeah, I think of all them kind of guys, I think Ted Braden's possibly the strongest suspect, isn't he? He's pretty. He looks kind of similar. He's got the skill set. Motive's a bit sketchy on Ted Braden, is he? But I've only recently discovered Ted Braden, but I must admit, he's quite a strong candidate, really. But yeah, there is a possibility. It's a good. I think it's a fairly safe bet to say Cooper had some kind of military experience, parachute training. He knew what he was doing. He wasn't an amateur, just have a go hero type.
I agree. It's not. You're not.
He would have killed himself if he was.
Yeah, this isn't going to be your first jump. You don't plan a daring crime, but your only escape is on some specialized racing motorcycle, and you've never ridden a motorcycle. That's a terrible plan. It doesn't work.
Good analogy. Yeah. No, it doesn't. No. So it's highly likely that he came from a military background. Yeah, may have served in Vietnam. So and obviously that gives a lot of weight to suspects with that background. But no, certainly, as I say, the likes of Richard McCoy, and then if you're talking about obviously that type of guy as well, you've got Rackstraw, haven't you? There, but he's not a good suspect for me either. Really, he doesn't fit the character in well enough. He's too brash. He's too flamboyant. He's too cocky. And also as well, if it was him, they would have got him because they were all over him, weren't they?
Oh yeah.
The FBI.
McCoy and Rackstraw, those are two names that just keep people coming to me. Oh, I know who DB Cooper was. It was this guy in San Diego. I saw him on TV. Or, oh, I know who it was. It was Richard McCoy. I just watched this documentary on YouTube, and totally solves it. And the thing that bugs me about both of those guys is both Rackstraw and McCoy are essentially 20 years younger than what the stewardess who sat next to him for 3 hours said his age was. That's a big difference. I can look at you and say, oh, I can't really tell how old Rob is. I'm going to say he's in between 35 and 45. But I wouldn't look at you and say, oh yeah, I think you're in his 20s. I'm not going to be off by 20 years. And also McCoy and Rackstraw were both thoroughly investigated by the FBI because both of them at one point were in FBI custody. Rackstraw was on trial for murdering his stepfather, I believe. And then McCoy was on trial for his copycat skyjacking.
Yeah.
And I think if there was any shred of evidence that the FBI could have used to pin the Cooper skyjacking on them, they would have at the very least tried.
Well, and interestingly as well, I just seen on the DB Cooper Facebook group, mystery group, that Larry Carr has popped up on there. So it sounds like he is now. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure. I'm not going to ask you outright or anything about that. But whether or not you get him on the podcast. I know you've said you've tried to in the past. Okay, well, great. That's good enough for me. Yeah, but what I'm saying is, obviously, he was the FBI case agent in charge for a time. He was the lead agent, so he would know if the FBI, even if there was stuff about these guys that wasn't made public, about Rackstraw and McCoy and the like, he would have had access to the information. So if either of them were, even if they couldn't pin it, even if they couldn't produce the evidence to convict them, he would know whether or not, they were. You know what I mean? He would know what the prevailing wisdom was within the FBI. Whether or not they actually were McCoy, and if they were, would he really be sort of, joining in with the sort of the ongoing mystery now? Would he not have used his time as the case agent to try to investigate further and go back over there? He would have been aware, because they were so heavily investigated by the FBI, if there was any real possibility of them actually being Cooper.
Well, we have the FBI files if you want to read through them. And I don't, because they're so long, and it's not like reading a book. They're not in any sort of order.
No, I can imagine it being a very tough read.
Oh, yeah. And so luckily there are other people going through it, so I don't have to. But you can read. They investigated McCoy very thoroughly. They thought there was a chance that this wasn't a copycat. This was a person doing it for a second time. And there's eyewitness testimony that's not related to him that puts him at home on Thanksgiving. They checked the mileage on his car and didn't believe he could have done this. They looked into it many different ways and don't believe it was McCoy. They showed the stewardesses pictures of McCoy just 6 months after the DB Cooper hijacking and played audio of McCoy speaking, and they all said it wasn't him. So I just don't know what more evidence it's not McCoy that you need.
Well, plus as well, just going back to the Dan Grider thing again of his documentary, and I think this goes for any of the suspects who are being proposed by family members, so his kids that featured in the documentary. I would have thought if any of the suspects were, so obviously I'm also talking about LD Cooper, Marla's uncle, Walter Recker, who is it Lisa?
Yeah, Lisa Story.
Lisa Story. That her uncle. I'm sure there's one or two others as well. But obviously McCoy being the most prominent and the one we're talking about now. Any of the suspects who are being proposed by family members, it just seems to me that surely at some stage, they only seem to have circumstantial and second-hand information as evidence. Surely, if it was their relative who was DB Cooper, they would at some stage have either had sight of or since had possession of, or would have come across, solid evidence connected to the case. Be that the money, be that the fake bomb, whatever it may be, the flight ticket, because I would have presumed Cooper would have had a copy of his flight ticket, wouldn't he?
I'd like to think so.
Yeah.
If I was Cooper, I'd hang on to that.
Yeah. So it's just something more solid to prove that they actually were Cooper, rather than just what seems to be, just hearsay, stories, circumstantial evidence, unexplained incidents, whatever it may be. I just think anybody who's a family member, connected to a family member who they're saying is Cooper, I just would have thought over all this time that they would have had something either solid to produce as evidence, or had sight of it, or just been able to say something really, really specific that would pinpoint, say, right, yeah, you can only know that if DB Cooper was your relative. But and I don't know, obviously, I don't know every single thing that they've said and presented with regard to their relatives. But as far as I'm aware, all the suspects who are being proposed by family members, i.e. the ones I've just named and probably some others, there doesn't seem to be anything solid that they can put forward to prove it.
No, there never is. I mean, you've got Kenny Christensen, Dwayne Weber, many suspects have been pushed forward by family. And, people will say this can't be solved by a confession anymore because there's so many confessions. But I do think if you can tell me a story with enough detail in it that checks out in my mind, or I learn something new, or you have, this reason for how the money got to Tina Barr, or you have a story for what happened when his boots hit the ground, I'm willing to listen to that. And I think if the story is good enough that I could be convinced, and others could be as well. I just haven't heard that story yet.
No, I'd agree with you there. Yeah. I mean, as I say, I there's none of, particularly definitely not McCoy and the other ones that were mentioned there with the family connections. There's none of them that stand out for me. I mean, whilst we're talking about named suspects, obviously I said Ted Braden stands out for me as being quite a good potential candidate. But my favorite, and just to be, kind of put my position on record, I don't 100% believe that it's any of the named suspects. I'm most inclined to believe that we've never heard of him. We've never heard his name. We've never seen it. He's undiscovered, the real Cooper, which is probably how he would have wanted it. But if you had to pin me down and to say which one of the known suspects I think isn't potentially the best candidate, the one I like the best is Nicky Broughton's guy, James Klansnick.
James Klansnick, yeah.
I'd heard of his name, I think, before Cooper, but I hardly knew anything about him before CooperCon. And obviously met Nicky and you guys, and then he told me a bit about him. And I've looked into him since, and he's a pretty strong candidate. I mean, he's got everything that kind of fits in, really. The background, the experience, the knowledge of the aircraft, the Boeing connection, the management position, the tie can be explained. The only thing that's a little bit sketchy is the motive, which I think he falls down on a bit, which kind of holds me back from saying, yeah, I think that could well be him. Because I think it's a stretch to, even though I know he was associated with the Boeing supersonic project, which got binned. And, of course, that would have been a disappointment probably to him. But, I don't, from what I can gather, it doesn't sound like it. He sounded like he had a pretty decent life and a pretty nice, situation. I don't think he fell on hard times because of that. So I just think, I've not heard anything on him that would suggest a really strong motive. That's the only thing where I think he slips up. Otherwise, everything else it does, and he obviously does look quite like the image we have of Cooper. So he's a strong candidate, but I just think he's a bit weak on motive.
I agree with that 100%. I've told Nikki that in William Smith is sort of the same way. It's like you can bring a suspect to a certain point.
Yeah, it's
but
that
then
same
it's
thing
like
again. Yeah.
You can't prove it or disprove it. It puts you in this weird area where I think most suspects are sort of in that can't be proven, can't be disproven sort of area. Have you read Paratrooper of Fortune by Drew Beeson?
No, I haven't. No, but I do intend to at some point. I know I'm aware of it, and obviously, I can't really recall it. It was one of the early ones, I think. But I know you did the podcast with Drew, didn't you?
Yeah, I did a podcast with Drew. He was the first person to reach out to me and ask to come on the show, which made me feel like, oh, I'm big time. I've made it. People are begging to come on my show now. And then he presented Ted Braden, did a great job. And then a year or two later, he wrote Paratrooper of Fortune and came on again. Paratrooper of Fortune, great book. And one of the things I like most about it right now, especially, is it's one of the most recent. Dr. Edwards' book is the most recent now, but his book, Paratrooper of Fortune, was probably the second most recent book. So it gives you a different angle on the case. I mean, you read Max Gunther, that's before the internet existed. And times are a little bit different the way you can do research. In 1985, if you and I wanted to do research, it involves going to the library. So a little bit different. Rob, why do you think this story, this case, appeals so much more to men than women?
Possibly, yeah. Well, I know this is another one of your stock questions. I don't mean that in any kind of derogatory way. It's a good question, and it's an important one. Probably several factors. The era when it was committed, it was seen as a man's thing to do. It's kind of, I suppose it's like a yearning in most men to, be able to be so daring and pull off something like that. Yeah, I suppose you just kind of associate it with masculinity, don't you? Bravado. As I say, a kind of like a stereotypical, male hero of the period, of the era, really. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, obviously nowadays things are different, aren't they? There's a lot less. It's not less clearly defined what's a male pursuit, what's a female pursuit, male interest, female interest. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's obviously the fact that DB Cooper himself was a man has probably got some, or well, unless of course you think it was Barb Dayton. But no, I don't know. Yeah, it's just it's like a classic caper, of its time, when men were meant to be, sort of war heroes and that type of thing, and gung ho and what have you. Yeah, I don't know really. It's why it's I mean, I think you said that it's still the case. The vast majority of people who are interested in this, even today, and also of people who are coming on board, who are new people who are interested in it, who have not been involved, not been looking into it for years. They're mostly male as well, are they? There's not a great deal of female interest across the board.
No, I mean, at CooperCon, look around the room. Mostly dudes. And then if I look at my audience, if I look at the people who follow me on Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, 95% men. And that's a totally self-selecting audience. It's not like I said at the beginning of each show, this episode is for men to consume only.
That would be interesting if you said that. I don't think the podcast would be on for very much longer, would it? No, yeah, it's a funny. Yeah, I don't know. It's just, I suppose, old traditions and habits, and I don't know. Would you say prejudices? I don't know, predispositions. They're ingrained in society, aren't they? And it's a kind of a male thing. I don't know. It's just a masculine. Bit like why, if you generally, go into a tool shed somewhere and you hear some clanking or bang, tinkering and going on in a shed, in a tool shed, you're looking there, it's pretty likely to be a guy fiddling, tinkering with something or making something or repairing something rather than a lady. No particular reason for that nowadays, but that's just how it is.
Well said. Rob, is there anything I didn't ask you?
Oh, probably.
For?
I'm not as prepared as I probably should have been. I know I intended to just write loads and loads of notes just so I didn't forget things. Then I thought, well, I'll just spend the whole interview or whatever you want to call it, just gazing down at a notepad and reading things, which won't be very good, for the format. But quite possibly, other than just to say, and I know I've mentioned it already, CooperCon was fantastic. And what was the best thing about it for me was meeting Bill Mitchell. That was super. I mean, to actually meet him and speak to him and listen to him, I mean, it's virtually the next best thing to meeting Cooper himself. I mean, here we all are. We're just so we're all enthusiastic about this, and we all think it's a great thing, and we're all big subscribers to the Cooper Vortex and Cooperverse, and obviously none of us will ever get to meet Cooper if ever found out who he was. But Bill Mitchell was actually there. He saw him. He was within whatever 6-8 feet or something. And it's just like almost. It's like he was going to meet in living history in a way. It was just fantastic. And also as well, the fact that he's such a great guy, really, really open and patient and warm and, engaging, he was so easy to talk to. And, I spoke to him several times as did lots of people, and because you would think he would be fed up with the whole thing by now, but, clearly he wasn't. And he was just, he was brilliant.
If you could go back in time and get on flight 305, what would you say to DB Cooper?
Just leave us some little extra little clue as to who you were. Just something, just maybe however cryptic you want to make it. Just some, because we can't get anywhere with the case, and it's just too, I don't know. We just need something more, just a little extra thing, just to help it along a bit. Just tease us with something a bit more. Something just slightly, a little bit more of information that could help identify, if not who he was, who he may likely be to have been. I'm not sort of mangling my words too much.
If I could show you the identity of who DB Cooper was, and you would have all the answers, exactly what happens when his boots hit the ground, who it was, why he did it, it all. But you could never tell anyone else. Would you accept that offer?
Wow, that's a real catch-22, isn't it? I don't honestly know. That would just kill you, wouldn't it? That would be some. I mean,
it'd be torture.
I suppose I could make it. Yeah, but then I suppose I could make a deathbed confession. I say I knew all along it was this guy, but. Oh, yeah, what the hell? Yeah, I'd like to know. I think I could keep it to myself.
All right. Rob, if people want to harass you about your opinions on DB Cooper, or if they just want to say hi, is there somewhere they can do that?
Oh, well, they can. I'm on the DB Cooper Facebook. I don't have a general. I'm not on Facebook generally as my real self. For similar reasons to yourself, actually. You said you removed your profile because you just got fed up. Too many people contacting you with, basically harassing you. And I just got fed up with Facebook a long time ago on a general personal basis because there was just so much rubbish on there, and it just seemed to be a load of claptrap and drivel basically, and just stuff that I wasn't interested in really. I seemed to be friends with people I'd never even met or heard of. I just found the whole thing a bit fake and disingenuous. So I removed my personal profile years ago, but I'm actually on the DB Cooper Facebook mystery group now as, what name did I use? Jesus Christ, I've just made up a name. Oh, Robert Coote. But you'll find me on there. I'm using James Bond as my picture. So if anybody wants to say anything to me, they just need to go on the DB Cooper Facebook mystery group and find James Bond, the James Bond icon, a picture of Sean Connery as James Bond. And that's me. I'm disguising. I'm going incognito as James Bond on there.
All right. Final question: who was the best James Bond?
Well, I've just named him.
It's Sean Connery.
Oh, of course it has to be the original and the best. Although Daniel Craig's pretty good.
I agree with that as well.
Yeah. Are you a Bond fan?
Yeah, I just watched No Time to Die like
Oh, I don't
two
spoil it.
weeks
I
ago.
haven't seen it. I haven't seen it yet, so don't spoil it. But is it as good as they say, as people seem to say it is?
It's really good. It's really
Okay, cool.
long though. I don't know why does every movie now have to be 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Yeah, it's at that at one time films had like the films were a lot shorter than that, weren't they? I mean, they weren't much more than an hour and a half, 2 hours tops. I don't know
Yeah,
why that's happened. That is a thing, though, isn't it? You're right there.
yeah. You saw the new Batman also. That was 3 hours long.
Yeah, if you're asking me, they're stretching that franchise out a little bit anyway now. Batman, kind of, I was done with it after Batman Returns.
Well, Rob, Ben Holland and I had a great time hanging out with you at CooperCon.
Oh, sure thing. Oh, that's likewise. That's the one. That's one thing I didn't mention. Yeah, that just to briefly. I had a great time, yeah, with you guys. Likewise, but Ben, and obviously I thanked him at the time personally, but just to put on record, he was really good to me. That the day before I flew home, he actually took me out on a tour around the drop zone area, and we went and had just to get a feel for the whole kind of Cooper scenario, and the drop zone area and just what the whole place is like. And because obviously he lives there, and it was really good of him. He took me around, showed me a few of the different parts of the woods, and different. And went down. We couldn't get to Tina Bar, but we went nearby on the Columbia. But the best thing about it was, just to close this little tidbit, his little boy was with us, who happens to have the first name Cooper. So I
Yes.
was taking on I was taking on a tour around the drop zone with Cooper. I mean, you can't get much better than that, can you?
As much as it pains me to say this, Ben Holland is a pretty good guy.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah, he is actually. He's a cracking fella. Yeah, I enjoyed his company as I did with all you guys. Yeah, it was. It'd be great to get. I mean, unfortunately, it was a bit of a one-off. Because it was the 50th anniversary and circumstances just aligned so that I was able to get over there. And I certainly unfortunately won't be able to be coming back on an annual basis. But if the case hasn't been solved and CooperCon is still going strong, I would certainly like to entertain the possibility of coming back for the 60th anniversary and seeing you guys again in 10 years or whatever, 9 and a bit years' time.
Hell yeah, I'm into that idea. Or maybe next time I'm in the UK, I'll give you a ring.
Oh, by all means, you must do. Yeah, please do if you're over here. Yeah. Have you ever been to the UK?
No, I don't even have a
Oh,
passport.
oh, that's right. Of course. Yeah, you said you were a redneck or something, didn't you?
Yeah.
That's right. You'd
I
never
think it was
left
white
the tent.
trash was what.
Yeah, that was it. Your words, not mine. Yeah, no, by all means, I'd love to meet if you ever come over to this, or even if you just go into Europe or whatever, this part of the world. Yeah, drop me a line and we'll hook up for sure.
Hell yeah. Rob, thanks for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been a great pleasure and a privilege. And what number podcast is this, by the way?
I think this will
Do you know?
be 62.
Oh, fantastic. Well, keep it going. I know you were talking about maybe winding it up at some stage in the not too distant future, but I think as long as you can keep sucking the juice out of the case, for one of a better description, as long as there's mileage in it, yeah, keep going. I think it's a great thing what you're doing.
I've tried walking away a few times now, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah. Well, I'll keep my eyes and ears peeled, as you say, potentially for some interesting candidates in the future as well. And I know we mentioned Larry Carr there. What have I heard you also say at one time you were trying to get Tina Mucklow on as well?
No,
Do you think
I've
that's
never
beyond
made an attempt to get Tina Mucklow on.
right? Do you think she'd be possibly open to the suggestion, or is it off limits? Do you think?
I don't know. One of the reasons I don't even want to ask her is she hasn't wanted to talk about it. And in that Rolling Stone article that came out, I think 2019, 2020 maybe, she specifically mentions being harassed by men about the case. And
Yeah.
I don't want to be added to that list.
Sure, that's a fair standpoint to take. Although it does seem as though she's kind of hidden away for years and stayed out of the limelight and not associated herself with it. But just recently, all of a sudden, it is as if she's kind of opened up a bit and now is prepared to talk about it. So you never know. Maybe it might be worth just a tentative, sort of prod or whatever, just to put a feeler out, just to assess the potential, maybe, because I mean that would be box office if you could get her on.
That would be pretty cool. I've been working on Jeffrey Gray since I started this show.
Okay,
and
yeah.
I had it scheduled, and we've had it rescheduled a few times. So I'm fairly confident now that it's safe to say he will be on the show. I've bullied him enough that he says he's going to do it.
Oh, well, that's good.
But it hasn't happened yet. That one's really exciting for me, because reading Skyjack is what really sent me into the vortex.
Right. That's the one I haven't read, actually. Of the books that I kind of on my list that I think I should read and would like to read but haven't read, that's the main one. So I've not read his book, but I do intend to at some stage. And it would be really interesting to hear from him on here. That would be fantastic.
Well, stay tuned, Rob.
Will do.
All right. Thanks again, Rob. I appreciate it.
Yeah, good to be in touch with you. Look after yourself, Darren. All the best.
You too. If you want to hang out with Rob, you can find him on the DB Cooper Mystery Group on Facebook. He's the dude with the James Bond avatar. Do you know who DB Cooper was? Did you find a $20 bill and a parachute in your great-grandpa's old attaché case? Do you have a hot take on the Tina Bar money? Hit us up. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or email us, dbcooperpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you to Rob Cox for flying over the Atlantic Ocean and the continental U.S. to hang out with me at CooperCon. Thank you to Ben Holland for being the life of the party and the pilot of the party bus. Thank you to Russell Colbert for never slapping anyone on stage. I'm Darren Schaefer, and thank you for listening to the Cooper Vortex.
Here's a story we all know about a man many years ago. Hijacked a plane, so we were told. Then he jumped into the cold. Lights are burning and a cigarette. He's in the air, the stage is set. Polite and kind, the people say it's time to make his getaway. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. D.B. Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. Rolled up in his coat-built tie. He's got enough to change his life. Where he landed, no one knows. But from this tale, a legend grows. Was a cold, dark, rainy night. As he walked, he saw light. Held his cash close to his side. Just needs to catch a ride. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. D.B. Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. Soaking wet down to the bone. Look for a place to use the phone. Little cafe outside of town. He walked in, he just sat down. Met a man with a cowboy hat who told a friend right where he's at. Into the night he disappeared. And from that night a legend reared. This is how the story goes about the money and the man. D.B. Cooper, they call me now. Catch me if you can. 40 years, the secret's out. The story has been told. D.B. Cooper's done running now. He was 80